Everyone has a story. It may not be glamorous or filled with adventure, but it's theirs. Welcome to Lifting with Larry, the podcast that features the unique stories of everyday passengers from the world of rideshare.
Welcome to Lifting with Larry, What's Your Story? Where I usually sit down and talk with some of the interesting passengers that I've met while driving rideshare for Lyft and Uber. Today I have a special guest host with me. It's my better half, my beautiful wife, Kathy.
Well, thank you. It is my pleasure to be here with you today.
So please excuse me if my voice is a little rough tonight. My son and I watched the First Responder Bowl today. We watched WKU in their triumphant victory over Western Michigan in a football game that had just a bizarre ending. It's one of the stranger endings to a football game that I think I've ever seen, but I was very proud of the Hilltoppers for pulling out a victory in the bowl game. What a season they've had, and just very proud of them. Very proud to be a Hilltopper today.
Go Tops.
Go Tops. Since this episode is going to be released on New Year's Eve of 2019, I thought it'd be a good idea to maybe kind of take a look back at the year in review and also maybe look forward a little bit to what's ahead in 2020. So first of all, when I started this year, babe, I don't think I had any idea that I was going to start a podcast. I don't think I had mentioned it. Do you remember me ever talking about that?
I actually do not recall you talking about that at the beginning of this year.
I was driving rideshare. I've been doing that for a few years now. And I did at one time have a YouTube channel where I would post some of the funny rides that I had, or sometimes when I had interesting conversations with passengers. And after the ride, I would get their permission and I would post those videos on my YouTube channel. But that came to an end when Uber said that we're no longer allowed to broadcast passengers, and that's all because of a guy up in St. Louis who was live streaming his rides on Twitch, and he had a lot of followers, and they were making very disparaging comments about some of the women passengers that he had. And I think there was an incident where he had some hockey players in his car, and they were talking not so nicely about their coach, and that ended up getting back to him, and some things happened. But anyway, Uber sent out a new terms of service through the driver app, which they'll do on occasion. They'll change the terms of service, and we'll get in the car ready to work that night and turn on the app, and it pops up with this terms of service. And you either agree to it or you're not allowed to sign in. So, I mean, you certainly have a choice not to sign it, but if you decide not to agree to it, then you can no longer drive for them. And so this terms of service said that you're not allowed to broadcast passengers even if you have their permission. So that kind of put an end to that. So I'd already started posting some pictures to Instagram and have a lot of fun with that. I definitely have a lot of fun taking selfies with my passengers. If you haven't checked out my Instagram, be sure and check out. It's just Lifting with Larry, Lyfting, Lifting with Larry. It's not like weightlifting like some people think, but lifting like Lyft and Uber. So check that out. Got a lot of cool pictures on there, and that's always a lot of fun. I have a lot of fun. People get in and they've heard about the Instagram, and they'll get in. They'll be very excited about taking a picture, and so that's always a joy. If you're ever a passenger in my car and I don't mention the Instagram, be sure and bring it up, and I'll be happy to take a picture. Sometimes it just doesn't come up really organically in the conversation, and I try not to really kind of force it out there. So yeah, started out the year with no idea I was going to be starting a podcast, doing rideshare, doing the Instagram thing, and being out on the road and in my car so much, I listen to a lot of podcasts. And so one of the ones that you probably heard me mention a lot of times if you listen to this podcast at all is Rideshare Adventures. And it's some guys and gals up in Grand Rapids, Michigan, who put on a rideshare related podcast. They call it an infotainment podcast because not only they provide really good info for rideshare drivers, they also provide a lot of entertainment. They tell a lot of good, funny stories of rides that they've had. And they also cover Uber news and tips and tricks and just all sorts of fun stuff. So started listening to those guys, and they actually live stream their podcast when they record it on, they live stream it on Facebook and on YouTube. And so you can interact with them. You can send in comments, type in comments, and they'll chat back with you. And started doing that on a frequent basis and really got to know the guys up there, and they've really turned into just really good friends of mine. And one of them, especially Jason, who was a guest on my previous podcast, he really kind of started putting the bug in my ear about starting my own podcast. And I tried to figure out something that I wanted to do now that I took my YouTube channel down. And I think I talked with you, Kathy, about something new that I could do.
I know for you too, your heart was really with Uber when you were doing your Ubering and lifting was number one, to get to know the people, the passengers,
Sure.
and to find out what their story was. And really, I think that's one of the things that made you very unique and stand out from maybe other Uber drivers or Lyft drivers. You really wanted to know what was your passenger stories. And as a result, that really became the heart of your message in a sense. And that is actually what ended up being what your podcast was ultimately became about.
I remember I was invited to be a guest on WKU's Top of the Week podcast with Laurel Deppin and Rebecca Albee.
And I remember talking on their podcast about wanting to share people's stories. And so when I started thinking about doing a podcast, we were kind of brainstorming between the two of us and came up with the idea of Lifting with Larry, What's Your Story? Because I get to meet so many interesting people and hear a lot of really interesting stories. But again, Bowling Green's so small that a lot of times they're only in the car 5, 10, 15 minutes. A lot of times you don't get to hear their whole story. And I like to say everybody's got a story. Everybody does. It may not be the same, or some people think they don't have a story, or they may not want to share their story, but everybody's got one. So started talking to the guys at GR Rideshare and started kind of picking their brain as far as how to set up a podcast. What do you need? What kind of equipment you need? And they were just a true godsend. They've shared so much knowledge with me and made my path so much easier than theirs were, I think, because they kind of started from scratch and didn't have anybody that they could bounce ideas off of. And so they got me started and started thinking about it and started asking some passengers and started putting a podcast together. And I released my first episode of Lifting with Larry, What's Your Story? On May 21st of this year, which doesn't seem that long ago, but I can't believe it's the end of the year already. This year has certainly flown by. And I think we've talked about before that as we get older, the years seem to go by faster and faster and faster.
Absolutely.
So again, started the podcast in May of this year, which was probably about the worst time I think I could have started this particular podcast. And the reason I say that is so many of my passengers are Western Kentucky University students. While school's in session, probably 80% plus are Western students. And I released my podcast right when school was getting done for the year. So it probably would have been better to wait until after the summer, but I wasn't thinking that far ahead at the time. So over the summer, had some definite lulls in the podcast. My plan was to release every other week. I try to release every other Tuesday, and that didn't happen during the summer. It's easily the hardest part, I think, of doing this podcast that I found is lining up guests to be on the show. Because you talk to people in the car about the podcast, and they get really excited, and they want to be on it. And then you try to get back in touch with them and set up a time and in a place, and they kind of ghost you. They end up, just not responding to you, or you just can't pin them down. I think that's definitely the hardest part so far, putting on this podcast.
What would you say are some of the other struggles that you faced when you were first starting out the podcast, as well as things that you might continue to struggle with?
I guess starting out was just the unknown factor of not having done it before. Again, I was very blessed to have a lot of people that I could bounce ideas and find out how they did things. What company did they host with? What kind of microphones do you use? Just a lot of stuff like that. But it's still just, it's still a little bit unnerving, I guess, when you put out your first episode. You're not sure how it's going to be received or if anybody's ever going to listen. But I certainly want to thank everybody who's listened to this podcast and how they've embraced it. And I appreciate it so much that people do take time out, because there's a lot of podcasts out there that you can listen to. And to think that, I have people that are taking the time out to listen to this just really makes it all worth it. As far as things I might struggle with still now, I have to say probably just finding the guests, just lining up the guests. If I could go back and do it again, I think I would probably wait until I had maybe 6 episodes recorded before I even released the first one, and give you a little space. And I'm not the best about following up sometimes and staying on people as far as trying to line up and a guest. So that's something I certainly can work on in the future.
Well, I know through your experience, you've had a lot of triumphs too as well, because you've done exceptionally well in getting your podcast off the ground. And I know that Jason and Ben have played a big role in that and mentoring you. Looking forward to how you might possibly mentor or give advice to others who want to start a podcast, what would be one of the number one tips that you would give them if a future podcaster who has that aspiration of starting his podcast for the first time, what advice would you give them?
I think one piece of advice would certainly be what we just talked about. Have several episodes recorded before you release the first one, especially if you're going to do a weekly or a bi-weekly podcast, as long as it's not something topical, that news related, that has to be current. Like mine certainly are not tied to any particular date and time necessarily, so I could record several and then release them. That would be one. And number 2 is just reach out to different Facebook groups or Reddit groups. There's a lot of people out there who are willing to help. And it's been kind of cool because I actually have had one person who's a guest on my podcast, Antonio, and he's in the works of starting his podcast. And it's been a lot of fun to kind of help pass it along, the help that I receive from Ben and Jason, and try to help pass that along to Antonio and encourage him and, answer questions and give him advice on different things. And I hope I can do that in the future to a lot more people. One of the things I've talked about in the future is starting a podcast studio here in Bowling Green. I think that'd be a lot of fun. I think that would be something that would find a lot of use here in town. So I think a lot of people would be able to utilize it, even if they didn't have the technical background or the equipment. They could still have a great idea for a podcast and come in and have the equipment there and somebody that can edit it and all that kind of stuff. And all they have to do is come in and produce the podcast. So after I got my podcast started, headed into the summer, one of the highlights of the summer was definitely, I got an invitation from the guys up in Grand Rapids. They were throwing a rideshare picnic for all the rideshare drivers up in their area, and they invited me to come up and be a part of that, and also to do both of their podcasts, because not only do Ben and Jason and Jesper and Samantha do GR Rideshare Adventures, Jason and Ben also have another podcast called Threads Podcast, Life Unfiltered. So they invited me up, and I headed up to Michigan. It's the first time I've ever been to Michigan. It was a great drive, a pretty drive, and Michigan is very pretty in the summer, although it was pretty hot, hotter than I expected to be up there.
But not quite as hot as Kentucky.
It was pretty close. It was pretty close the days I was up there. It was in the 90s, I know, the day of the picnic for sure. So yeah, I got to go up there and did the GR Rideshare Adventure podcast on Friday night after I got up there. Then on Saturday we had the picnic, had a good turnout, had a lot of good food, got to meet a ton of the people that I talked to on a chat program called Telegram that, again, the GR Rideshare Adventure people started up there as just a way for local rideshare drivers up there to share information, but they've invited people from all over the country to join that group. So I got to meet all these people in person that I talked to on Telegram all the time. So it was really great to meet not only Ben and Jason and Jesper and Samantha. I got to meet Gabe and Palka and Pete and several others that I'm sure I'm forgetting at this time. But that was really cool to get to go up and do those 2 podcasts and also have the picnic. So that was definitely one of the highlights of the summer for sure. Some more of the highlights, I think, of the year. I think definitely releasing my first episode of the podcast was a highlight. Just, having the vision and getting the equipment and learn how to do everything and record and learn how to edit audio, which I'd never done before, and find a hosting company and get everything uploaded and, to find somebody to do an intro. There's just a lot of pieces involved that you don't really think about when you listen to a podcast. It all seems so easy. It seems like, hey, somebody just hit record and start talking, and that's a podcast. And there's a little bit more to it than I thought, for sure. So that was really a great milestone to release that first podcast and see those first few listeners download the podcast, that's certainly a great feeling that you get just one chance at. Another highlight, I think, during the summer was being able to go to a conference called Podcast Movement. That was held down in Orlando, Florida. And that was just a really cool conference. It's the largest podcasting conference in the world right now. And I really had no plans to go to it. I'd read a little bit about it, but didn't plan on going to it. But they have this thing where you can apply for a scholarship. If you're a kind of a new podcaster, you've never been to their conference before, you can fill out a form and do this little essay and talk about why you want to come to the conference and why you think it would help you and what you think you would get out of it. And they pick 20 people to award scholarships to. And I think they had about 300 entrants this year, and I was just lucky enough and blessed enough to be chosen as one of those 20 scholarship recipients. So I got to go to the conference for free, which was really cool. It's an amazing conference, and it's so cool that you go down and get to meet all these people who have the same interests that you have. You don't have to worry about finding things to talk about because you can just walk up to anybody and ask them, hey, what's your podcast about? Where are you located? How long have you been podcasting? You have all these just built-in conversation starters and questions to ask each other. And you meet very small podcasters who just started. Like, I think I just released my first episode or two when I went down, maybe 2 episodes, I'm not sure. And there's people there who have been doing it for 10 years and released, 1,000 episodes. And they have all sorts of different tracks that you can attend, classes on technical items such as, microphones or audio editing, how to do that better, or how to make money on your podcast, how to get sponsors for your podcast, how to be a better interviewer, just hundreds of different sessions that you can attend. They usually have about 8 to 10 sessions an hour, and you can choose one of those that you can attend to. And then you can also, we were also lucky enough to get what they call the digital package, where we can log in and listen to any of those sessions that we weren't able to go to forever. We have access to those, which was just amazing.
What would you say was one session that really stood out to you where you just gleaned a lot of information from?
That's a tough question. There are so many good ones. I'd have to look back through my notes to probably pinpoint even the top couple of sessions that I attended. There was one really good one that I attended, which was about editing audio, which I was still really, really new to. I had never worked in that field at all. And so I just gained a lot of really good tips. They talk about how to really maintain the flow of your podcast and not get carried away with trying to edit out every little, or every little bit of silence that's in there, because it really makes the person's conversation flow. It just really messes it up. And you can hear that if you pay attention to it. So I think that was kind of, especially as a beginner, that was my mindset. I have to take out every little that's in there, but that's not true. It doesn't sound natural if you do that. So that was a really good one for me as a beginner to attend.
The Podcast Movement Conference was 4 days long. It was really amazing, and I want to thank the people at Podcast Movement so much for awarding me a scholarship to attend. I learned a lot, and I'm very grateful to them. It was a lot of fun, and I got to hang out with my sister and my brother-in-law for a little bit. She lives down in Clearwater, Florida, and they happened to be in Orlando that weekend for a disc golf tournament that my brother-in-law was playing in, or actually practicing for, I think. So I got to have some pizza with them at Giordano's Pizza, which is our favorite pizza place. If anybody works at Giordano's Corporate and would like to sponsor this podcast, we'd be more than happy to talk with you. So just get in touch. So yeah, that was definitely one of the highlights of the year.
And then actually kind of looking forward to next year, you loved that conference so much that you are already making plans to return to that same conference.
That is very true. Yes, I enjoyed it tremendously and learned just a huge amount. And I think maybe the day after I got home from it, I think I registered for next year's. They had a really great early bird price. And so me and Jason from Rideshare Adventures, he signed up as well. We're trying to talk maybe Ben and Jesper, Sam to go too. But me and Jason are definitely going to be there. We've already got our Airbnb booked. We've got our conference package bought. I think Jason may already have his airline ticket already as well. So I'm still working on that. Hopefully I can find a good flight on Southwest instead of driving. But yeah, that's going to be a lot of fun, and I think it'll even be a better experience now that I have a little bit more background in podcasting and not quite as brand new as I was last year. And another highlight of the year, I'd have to say, was the Daily News contacted me. I'm not sure how long ago was that now. 2 months ago.
Approximately 2 months ago. 2 months ago,
yes. Something like that. Contacted me, and they had somehow come across my Instagram, I think, or I'm not sure what the series of events that led to it, but they asked if they could do a story on me, which was a lot of fun. I met and just sat down and talked with the reporter. They took a few pictures. We met down at Spencer's Coffee Shop, and I thought they did a really good job on the article. And I've gotten just a ton of comments from people at work, and then some of my passengers, have mentioned that. And I think that's also led to
one of the local TV stations, WNKY, is actually coming out on New Year's Day
to do an interview with me. I think it's going to air on their morning show. I'm not sure when, but it's been really neat how it's kind of spread word of mouth. I don't do any advertising for my podcast except on my Instagram and my Facebook and through word of mouth. But I have to say the Western students are really good about publicizing and spreading word about my podcast, because it's not unusual for me now to pick up somebody, especially if it's on campus, and they'll get in and then they'll look and they'll ask if I'm lifting with Larry.
They are a walking advertisement for you.
They really are. They really are. And it's cool. I love the college kids. I went to Western Kentucky University myself. I had, 4 sisters that went there. My brother went there. My dad went there. So we're definitely a WKU family, and just always loved Western Kentucky University. I guess I must have loved it. I went there for 13 years, part-time, working my way through school. But I love just the college kids' energy. They're very enthusiastic about life. They have a lot of ideas. They have a lot of opinions about things. And it's a lot of fun to interact with them and hear what they're thinking and try to keep up with the lingo and the terminology of what's going on today. And I think sometimes some of my kids are very surprised when I know some of the things that I know, because I've talked with that about that with some of my passengers.
In addition to what you were just sharing too, I know that you have a real heart for the college kid population, especially at WKU. You have a heart to want to be able to make sure that they get home safely, and especially for your female passengers too. You just want to ensure that they're in good hands and that they will get to where they're going safely. I know at times you've taken on kind of a fatherly role and kind of doled out some wisdom as well, and that's been received very well by the students.
Yeah, I do give dad talks to some of my passengers, and that happens on a fairly regular basis. But yeah, I do. I mean, we have 8 kids. 3 of them are girls, and I have 5 sisters. Grew up with 5 sisters and just 1 brother, and so I do have I think a special concern. Not that something can't happen to guys as well, but I think the females are certainly just a little more vulnerable. Especially if somebody's been out and they've had too much to drink. I take it very seriously as far as getting them home safe, making sure they're home safe. It really warms my heart when I get people that will contact me either through Instagram or through a text or whatever, specifically wanting me to come pick them up because they know they're safe with me. And I've had several of them that comment, we really appreciate the fact that you are respectful, that you get us home safely, that we don't have to worry about anything, when we're riding with you. That makes it all worthwhile for me.
Absolutely. You've developed that sense of trust with them. You are an extremely trustworthy person in all areas of your life, and that comes shining through, especially with your rideshare.
Thank you. I appreciate that, hon. Just last night I had a lady, and she's not a Western student, I don't believe. I think she's married and has a child, but she sent me a message asking if I was driving because she was out with some friends, and thought she was going to need a ride home, and she just didn't want a random driver because, let's face it, there are some kind of kind of spooky or scary or sketchy drivers that are out there. And that's unfortunate. And if you have one of those, please do report them, because that's the only way we can get them off the platform, is if enough passengers report them and let the rideshare companies know what's going on. But yeah, she contacted me and said that she didn't want a random driver, and asked if I would be able to come get her. So that, like I said, that always just really makes me feel good when people, my passengers, trust me enough to do that.
Absolutely.
Then one more highlight that I want to talk about is Nick.
Absolutely. We cannot forget about Nick.
Nick was a big part of my rideshare experience for a few months this year. And Nick Huey is a photojournalism major at Western. He's a senior. He's from Atlanta, Georgia. He's a very, very talented young man, and just a super guy. He's a lot of fun to hang out with. He likes to do short documentary films on different subjects. And so be sure and go to his website, which is nickhuey.com, and that's spelled NICHUEY.com, and look at all of his documentaries that he's got out there. He contacted me on Instagram wanting to do kind of a documentary about rideshare. In order to film the documentary, Nick actually rode along with me several nights, probably 5 or 6, 7 nights. I would go by and pick Nick up. And so we kind of had a system worked out where he would sit in the front seat, and sometimes when I was just driving around, he would film and ask me questions while I was driving. And then I would get a call to go pick some people up. And when we got to the point to pick them up, if there were 3 or less people, I would get out and I would explain to them what Nick was doing and ask if they were okay if he rode with us, so he could work on his documentary. And we never had anybody that said no, that they weren't okay with him riding. They were usually like really intrigued on what he was doing, and he would explain to them that he was filming this documentary, and then they would be very intrigued about who I was and why is he filming a documentary on me. So it was a lot of fun. And like I said, Nick is a really super guy, and it can be a lonely job, especially if you don't have a group like the Telegram group that I have. If you're just out there by yourself with no one to talk to, sure, you interact with passengers, but they're in and out so fast that a lot of the time you're just out there by yourself. So it was kind of a lot of fun to have Nick ride along with me for a while, and he got to know the guys and gals on the Telegram group, and they would worry about Nick, because if we got there and there were 4 passengers, then Nick would have to just get out wherever I was picking them up at and wait until I took them to their destination and then came back and got him. So Nick spent some time, about 20 minutes, waiting on a curb one night, and about 20 minutes sitting on this little wall one time. And I would take the people to their destination, and then I would get on Telegram and tell them, hey, I'm on my way to get Nick. And they're like, oh, don't leave Nick. You're not supposed to leave Nick. Come on. So they were worried, and they were looking out for Nick and really got to know Nick. But anyway, be sure, like I said, go and check out his page, nickhuey.com. That's NICHUEY.com. And be sure and watch the documentary called The Midnight Express, which is a documentary he filmed about rideshare. And again, it was just a lot of fun. I wish him the best.
Absolutely. We had the pleasure of having Nick over in our home for dinner one evening. And then from there, he was doing a podcast. He was a guest on your podcast.
Episode number 8, I believe.
So, but he is just a wonderfully talented young man, and highly, highly recommend that you visit his website.
So next, just talk about maybe some of the funny or strange moments of the year. And there's usually don't go too long as a rideshare driver without having a strange or unusual moment. But I guess I'll just go through a couple of the ones that really kind of stick out in my mind for the year. And the first one was a story where I was going to pick up a passenger, and at first it was going to be a woman and a man, but it ended up he wanted to go home, and she wanted to go party with her friends at some other house, but he was just really tired and wanted to go home. And it was about 2:30 in the morning already. And so it ended up he got in and he was going to go home. And so she was getting in the car and trying to give him a kiss. And I thought they had been dating for a long time, and it turned out they just met that night. But anyway, at one point she was like sitting in my front seat trying to say goodbye to him, and when he was in the back seat, and she's like leaning through the gap in the passenger and the driver's seat. and trying to lean back in the back seat and kiss him. And all of a sudden she just like falls into the back seat with her butt up in the air, and her skirt like comes up over, up to her shoulders, and he's yelling at her, and it was just crazy. And it got even worse. So finally she gets out, we get her out of the car, and we're getting ready to leave. And he's like, will you look at that crazy woman? And I look back, and she's literally licking my back window, just like up and down the back window, which is just nasty. And so that's when I asked the guys, like, who is that woman? He's like, I don't know. I just met her tonight. So you never know what's going to happen. You just never know. So that was definitely one of the strangest episodes, I think, of the year.
I know each night when you come home, if I'm awake, or sometimes we're like ships passing in the night.
Yes, my wife tends to get up at between 3 and 4 a.m., which is crazy. But then I come in at 3 o'clock, and
which is just as crazy.
Especially when I have to go to work at 6 for my day job.
Exactly. But I'll usually ask you, do you have any good stories? And I always love hearing some of those stories. And I know you're going to share some more of those stories from this past year.
Sure. And the second one was one of the most probably uncomfortable rides I've ever had. And I went to pick up a lady at Dolphy's Lounge out on Scottsville Road. And a woman, her friend had actually called for the ride for her. And so she walks her friend out to the car and puts her in my front seat. And she tells her, hey, this is her first Uber ride, so, to take good care of her. She's like, here, I want you to call me when you get to her house. Let me know if she's there safely. And I'm like, yeah, that's fine. And I didn't find out till later that my passenger had actually just gone through a really, really bad divorce. And this was her first time really, I guess, going out on the town. And so we're sitting there getting ready to take off, and she turns and looks at me, and just as serious as can be, she's like, you're going to take me out and rape me, aren't you? And I'm like, nope, that is not how this works. And her friend's like, no, he's had a background check. He's good. He's going to call me when you get to your house. And I'm like, yep, that's right. I'm just going to take you home, drop you off. I'm going to call your friend, let her know you got home safe. That's it. We're all good. So we take off, and she lived about 20 minutes away, out towards Scottsville, out in the boonies. And at least twice on the way home, we were out on these country roads, and she's like, so is this where you're going to pull over and rape me? I'm like, nope, nope, not going to happen. And so, she finally passed out, which is great. And then get to her house and wake her up to make sure I'm at the right house. And she's like, yeah, this is the house. And then she asked what time it was. And I was like, it's like, 1:30 in the morning. And she tells me, oh, wow, that's really late. She's like, why don't you just come in and spend the night here? And I'm like, nope. So we go from this extreme of her being scared that I'm going to rape her to inviting me to spend the night. So get the whole spectrum all in one ride. So crazy, just crazy.
You never know what's going to happen.
You never do. So what's one of your favorite stories that I've had this year?
Well, there was the one story, and I guess that happened this year. They just all seemed to run together at times. But you had a family that was a passenger one time, and the little girl, she was young, and she ended up calling you Barley.
So she changed my name to Barley. Not just okay. She said, from now on, you will be known as Barley.
Well, you know the whole story, and I think your passengers or your listeners would really enjoy hearing that story.
Yeah, that was a really fun story. And if you want to hear that whole story, you can go to episode 6 of my podcast, and I do an interesting story of the week at every episode. And so that's in episode 6. The story I told about the woman licking my window, that's in episode 2 of my podcast. And the woman that was afraid I was going to rape her, that's actually on my very first episode of the podcast. So if you want to hear me tell those whole full stories, be sure and go back and listen to those episodes, and you'll get the complete story. But the girl that named me, she was about 8, and she was just the cutest little girl. She just so funny. And that was definitely, I think, probably the funnest ride I've ever had, between her and her dad. And they tipped me with a box of toothpaste. I mean, you got to go. And
not just one box of toothpaste.
No. It was like a case of toothpaste. Many tubes. I'm still using the toothpaste. Still have
almost a year later.
I still have probably half the case left. of toothpaste. So if you definitely want to go hear how that happened. So yeah, definitely go and listen to episode 6 and you'll hear the complete story. So that's kind of some of the funny or strange episodes. There's lots more that I can tell. They happen pretty frequently, but got to save some of them, I guess, for upcoming episodes of the podcast, so I won't have anything to tell for sure. So now I guess it's maybe time to look ahead a little bit to 2020 and some of my goals, I guess, of what I'd like to accomplish in the next year. One thing that I definitely want to work on is trying to be more consistent with the podcast as far as releasing episodes. My goal would be to release a new episode every other Tuesday. And again, that's something that I need to push myself to follow up with people better and try to nail people down as far as getting people lined up for the podcast. But if you've ever been a passenger of mine and you have an interest in being on my podcast, please reach out to me. You can contact me on Instagram, on Facebook, or you can email me at Larry@liftingwithlarry.com. Again, that's LYFTING, Larry@liftingwithlarry.com. Just reach out and let me know, and we will set something up and record an episode. I'm always looking for new guests. The second thing that I'd like to do is I'd like to experiment with one of the things that GR Rideshare Adventures does, and that's do some live episodes where I actually have a live stream as I'm recording an episode of the podcast. I think that'd be interesting to try. I know it involves a lot more technical work and making all that work together, but it's something I definitely want to try, and it would allow you to interact with me and me to interact with you a little bit more. Number 3, I think I definitely want to explore getting some Lifting with Larry merchandise. We've talked about maybe getting some keychains. I think those would be kind of cool to hand out during rides or maybe during like orientation at Western Kentucky University when they have all the booths set up and stuff. I think it'd be cool to have a booth set up there and hand out some merchandise and talk to some kids about rideshare. And number 4 is just having more interaction with you. I definitely enjoy interacting with my passengers, and I'd like to interact more with listeners of the podcast. And so I'll be exploring some different ways to accomplish that.
Those sound like wonderful goals.
Well, hopefully we'll be here a year from now and we'll be looking back on 2020 and seeing how many of those that I've accomplished, and hopefully they'll go well.
Well, knowing you, when you go after something, you put your whole heart and soul into it. And I feel very confident that you will have accomplished all 4 of those goals when we are sitting here a year from now.
And on that note, I definitely want to, again, thank everyone who's listened to an episode of Lifting with Larry. And just thank you to all my passengers that I have. It's just a lot of fun for me to be able to drive for Lyft and Uber and get to meet so many cool people. I tell everybody I've done probably closed in on 4,000 rides, I think. And out of those, I've had less than a handful that I would say were bad rides. And those are just people who wanted me to take too many people in my car. And so if you're an Uber or Lyft passenger, one thing that we would ask you not to do, don't ask your driver to break the rules. Don't ask to put 8 people in a car. Don't ask to bring open alcohol containers in the car, or don't ask for cash rides, things like that. Stuff like that can get us suspended where we're not able to drive anymore. I also want to thank my beautiful wife for co-hosting a few episodes and also for putting up with my podcasting obsession and the time that I spend out driving for Lyft and Uber, or recording the podcast, or editing the podcast, or having these strange people come in our house to record a podcast, all that kind of stuff. And also my family, kids who also put up with all this stuff as well.
Well, I would say it's not that we put up with it. It's that we really come alongside you and support you. We encourage you. We are your cheerleaders. We are very excited for you.
You are definitely my biggest cheerleader and biggest supporter. And you've always been 100% behind whatever I've wanted to do, which may not always be a good thing, but usually is a good thing. But I appreciate it.
And thank you for having me on the podcast today.
Oh, definitely. It's always a pleasure. And again, just want to thank everybody out there. Again, I just want to thank you for listening, and just want to wish everyone just a happy new year in 2020. I hope it's a fruitful and prosperous new year for everyone. And as always, just want to say thank you and God bless and stay safe out there.
Thank you for listening to Lifting with Larry. To subscribe to the podcast, check out other episodes, and keep up to date, head to liftingwithlarry.com.